Hello, and welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Find a comfortable position. Settle in under the weight of your blankets. Close your eyes and allow the world outside your quiet space to begin to fade away. There is nothing for you to do now, nowhere else you need to be. All that is required is that you rest and that you listen. Tonight, we are not traveling to a distant century of kings and castles, nor to the smoke-filled fields of a great battle. Our journey takes us back to a time that feels both familiar and yet strangely distant. We are going back to a single day in the autumn of 1972. It is a time of technological marvels and deep-seated anxieties. It's a time when the world felt as if it were shrinking, brought closer by the very technology that will be central to our story tonight. The passenger jet. We will be exploring the hijacking of Lufthansa Flight 615, an event that played out not in the corridors of power, but in the pressurized cabin of a Boeing 727, thousands of feet above the earth. But our story tonight begins not with the event itself, but with the world that surrounded it. The atmosphere, the textures, the quiet, everyday realities of the people who, on the morning of October 29, 1972, simply thought they were going home. So take a slow, deep breath. Let it go. And allow your mind to drift back with me to the world of 1972. Segment 1. The world of an autumn day in 1972, the barely perceptible cabin drone may become slightly more noticeable, but remains at a low, soothing level narrator. Our story begins, as so many do, with the mundane, with the simple, unremarkable routines of daily life. The year is 1972. The world is a tapestry of muted, earthy tones, avocado greens, harvest golds, and burnt oranges. It is a world of textures, of vinyl and wood paneling, of corduroy and thick polyester. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union has settled into a state of tense, perpetual equilibrium. The Apollo program has carried men to the moon, leaving a sense of profound technological optimism, a feeling that humanity, if it put its mind to it, could achieve the impossible. Yet, this optimism is shadowed by the ongoing conflict in Vietnam. A war broadcast nightly into living rooms, a constant low-level hum of global discord. And just a few months prior, in late summer, the world had witnessed the tragic events at the Munich Olympics. The Games, intended to be a celebration of peace and the resurgence of a modern democratic Germany, had been irrevocably scarred. An ideal had been shattered, and a new and palpable sense of vulnerability had crept into the global consciousness. The name of the group responsible, Black September, had entered the world's lexicon, a symbol of a new and unpredictable form of political violence. And so, in October of 1972, there was a quiet underlying tension, a feeling that the established order was more fragile than it appeared. And yet, for most people, life continued with its familiar rhythms. One of those rhythms, one that was becoming increasingly common for the middle class, was the ever-growing phenomenon of air travel. Imagine yourself preparing for a flight in 1972. The airport is not the sprawling, security-conscious fortress we know today. It is a more human-scaled space. The departures board is a mechanical wonder, a clattering, flipping display of letters and numbers that creates a unique and constant percussion in the terminal. There is a faint, sweet smell of jet fuel in the air, mixed with the aroma of coffee and unmistakably tobacco. A thin haze of cigarette smoke often hung in the air of the designated waiting areas, and sometimes even in the aircraft cabin itself. It was a detail of the time, as common as the heavy, solid feel of the paper ticket in your hand. This ticket was a document of substance, with multiple carbon copy pages, each representing a leg of your journey. Security is a far more relaxed affair. There are no full-body scanners, no requests to remove shoes or belts. For many, it is a simple walk through a gate, a smile from an attendant, and a stroll across the tarmac to the waiting aircraft. It was an age of assumed trust, an innocence that, in retrospect, seems almost naive. The vessel for our journey today is a common sight in the skies of 1972. A true workhorse of the jet age, the Boeing 727. It is an aircraft with a distinctive, memorable design. Its three powerful engines are clustered at the rear of the fuselage, leaving the wings clean and swept back. Most notably, It features a high T-shaped tail, making it look sharp and decisive against the sky. Some models even have a unique feature, a staircase that can be lowered from the rear of the plane, the ventral air stair, allowing passengers to board and deplane, even at smaller airports with limited ground equipment. Inside, the cabin is a narrow tube of carefully designed modernity. The seats, perhaps covered in a durable, patterned fabric or a smooth, cool vinyl, are arranged in rows of 2 or 3. In the armrest between them, you will find a small, recessed, metallic ashtray. Above you, the overhead compartments are smaller, meant for a coat or a small briefcase, not the large rolling suitcases of a later era. But an aircraft is merely a shell, a collection of metal, wires, and fuel. It is the people within it who give it life, who transform it from a machine into a space of human experience. Let us imagine the passengers of Lufthansa Flight 615 on this Sunday morning. It is a multi-legged flight, a common practice at the time, originating in Damascus, Syria, with several stops planned before its final destination of Frankfurt, West Germany. On board are a mix of nationalities, a microcosm of the interconnected world. There is likely a German businessman, his tie loosened slightly, his briefcase on his lap filled with papers he quietly reviews. He's thinking perhaps of his report and the relief of being home with his family by evening. There might be a family, the children restless with the unique boredom that only travel can induce, their parents speaking in soft, reassuring tones. They may be returning from a visit to relatives, their minds filled with the sights and sounds of Damascus, the taste of unfamiliar foods, the warmth of family embraces. There could be a young backpacker, perhaps a student. At the end of a long and eye-opening tour of the Middle East, they are tired, but their mind is alive with new experiences. For them, this flight is simply the final necessary step. The bridge between a world of adventure and the familiar comfort of home. The flight crew, for their part, move with a practiced efficiency. The Lufthansa pilots in the cockpit, going through their meticulous pre-flight checklists, the flight attendants, immaculate in their stylish tailored uniforms, preparing the cabin for departure. For them, this is another day at work, another series of landings and takeoffs, another cabin full of strangers to care for. At Damascus International Airport, the morning sun is casting long shadows across the tarmac. The passengers for Flight 615 have made their way from the terminal and are walking up the mobile stairs into the cool, climate-controlled air of the Boeing 727. They find their seats, stow their small bags, and buckle their seat belts. The cabin door is sealed, creating a quiet sense of separation from the world outside. The chief flight attendant makes the welcome announcements, her voice calm and professional over the public address system. The engines begin to spool up, their low rumble growing into a powerful, steady whine. There is that gentle, firm push back into the seat as the aircraft accelerates down the runway. A moment of suspension, and then the slight, almost imperceptible feeling of lightness as the wheels leave the ground. Flight 615 is airborne. As the plane climbs through the clear Syrian sky, the seatbelt sign chimes off, the passengers begin to relax. A book is opened. A quiet conversation begins. The flight attendants start to prepare the first beverage service. The rhythm of a routine flight has begun. It is a rhythm of calm, of progress, of unremarkable normalcy. And for a time, suspended between the earth and the sky, everything is exactly as it should be. Segment 2. A break in the rhythm narrator. High above the Mediterranean, Flight 615 proceeds on its charted course. The initial leg of the journey from Damascus is uneventful. The flight attendants move gracefully down the aisle, their trolleys laden with drinks and small snacks. The clink of ice in plastic cups, the soft tearing of foil packets, these are the familiar sounds of air travel. Outside, the small, double-paned windows. The world is a serene vista of deep blue sea, meeting an equally endless blue sky. A gentle curvature of the earth visible at the horizon. For the passengers, the initial anticipation of takeoff has settled into the quiet routine of flight. A ripple of awareness, of questioning glances, spreads through the rows of seats. It is at this point that a weapon is revealed. The flight crew, the pilot, the co-pilot, flight engineers suddenly find themselves no longer in sole command of their aircraft. The quiet, professional world of instruments and procedures has been breached. The hijackers are demanding the immediate release of the 3 surviving members of the Black September group responsible for the Munich Olympic tragedy, who are being held in prisons in West Germany. If the demands are not met, they state, they will blow up the aircraft with everyone on board. The passengers and the 13 crew members are no longer travelers. They are now hostages, bargaining chips in a political drama playing out at 30,000 feet. From this moment on, their training and their calm under pressure will be tested in ways they could never have fully anticipated. Each person is left alone with their own thoughts, their own quiet fears. Below, the patchwork of the Yugoslavian landscape comes into view. The bump of the wheels on the runway, the roar of the reverse thrusters. These are normal sounds, but the context is anything but. The plane circles once over the airport at Zagreb before making its final approach. Instead, it is directed to a remote, isolated area of the airfield, far from any other aircraft. It rolls to a stop, and the engines slowly spool down, their powerful whine replaced by a profound and unsettling silence. The only sounds are the constant, unwavering drone of the engines and the occasional murmured instructions from the hijackers. The flight attendants, stripped of their normal duties, can only offer what comfort they can through their own composure, their own projection of calm. They move through the cabin if permitted, their faces professional masks, their eyes conveying a shared, unspoken understanding with the passengers. It is not brandished wildly. Its appearance is treated as a simple, undeniable fact, a tool to ensure compliance. There are no shouts, no screams. The wait begins again, but this time it is a stationary wait. A wait on the hot tarmac of a foreign airfield under the autumn sun. The first phase of the ordeal is over. The flight has ended, but the journey is far from complete. They are on the ground, but they are still captives, waiting for a government miles away in Bonn, Germany, to decide their fate. It is not the familiar, reassuring voice of the captain or the chief flight attendant. The voice is male, steady, and it speaks with a clear, deliberate tone. The hijacker's demeanor remains controlled, their instructions clear. Passengers are to remain in their seats, to stay calm, to cooperate. In the distance, but clearly visible, are the silhouettes of police cars and military vehicles. They wait, silent and watchful, at a respectful distance. The aircraft is surrounded. Passengers are informed that the flight has been diverted. It is now under the control of a group identifying themselves as the Commando of the Martyr Wad Abu Chiru, a cell sympathetic to the Black September cause. The initial reaction is one of stunned, heavy silence. The normal rhythm of the flight has been broken. Some read, their heads bowed over a newspaper or a paperback novel. It is not a loud or dramatic event. It is a shift. A change in the cabin's delicate atmosphere that, at first, only a few might notice. Others simply gaze out the window, lost in thought. They are no longer heading towards Europe. The plane is now on a new course, southeast, towards Zagreb, in what was then Yugoslavia. They do not appear agitated or aggressive, but they move with a quiet, undeniable purpose that sets them apart from the others. Their movements are economical and swift. One makes his way forward, up the narrow aisle, towards the cockpit. The other remains positioned in the main passenger cabin, his presence alone creating a new focal point. The drone of the 3 rear-mounted engines is a constant, soothing presence, the very sound of progress. Imagine yourself in that cabin. The air is still, the atmosphere calm. You are suspended in this metal tube, a temporary community of strangers moving together towards a shared destination. It is a space of transit, a pause between one part of your life and the next. It is in the midst of this placid routine that the first, subtle deviation occurs. To men who had boarded with the other passengers, rise from their seats, conversations falter. The turning of a page seems to stop midair. The cockpit door is opened, and the first man steps inside. Soon a new announcement comes over the cabin's public address system. The demand is simple, direct, and monumental. The threat hangs in the still recycled air of the cabin. But it is delivered as a point of information, a statement of intent. And so a new and strange reality takes hold. The Boeing 727, a symbol of freedom and connection, has become a flying prison. The aircraft banks. Through the windows, the passengers who are watching see the coastline shift, the angle of the sun change. Time itself seems to slow down, to stretch into long, quiet, anxious intervals. After what feels like an eternity, the pitch of the engines changes. The familiar feeling of descent begins. The aircraft starts to lose altitude. The landing is smooth, a testament to the skill of the Lufthansa pilots, who are now flying under duress. The 727 does not taxi to the main terminal building. Through the small oval windows, the passengers can see that the airport is not operating as usual. Inside the cabin, the air begins to grow warm and stuffy without the full power of the air conditioning.
Segment 3, The Calculus of Decision. Narrator. On the tarmac at Zagreb Airport, time moves differently. Inside the cabin of the Lufthansa 727, the world has shrunk to the confines of the fuselage. The air is thick with a quiet, shared anxiety. The sun beats down on the metal skin of the aircraft, and the temperature inside slowly, steadily rises. The memory of that night, the miscalculations, the chaos, the tragic loss of life was a fresh and painful wound for the West German government. The shadow of Munich loomed large over the deliberations concerning Flight 615. The primary, overriding goal was to avoid another catastrophe, compared to the drawn-out uncertainty of other hostage situations. The West German government moved with decisive speed. The memory of Munich had taught them a bitter lesson about the risks of a forceful confrontation. The message was passed from the federal government in Bonn to the state authorities in Bavaria, where the 3 surviving Munich attackers were being held. Their identities were confirmed, and they were prepared for transport. There was no fanfare, no public announcement. It was a sterile, bureaucratic process. They were taken from their cells under heavy guard and driven to Munich Airport. The consensus formed quickly. They would not risk another firefight on an airport tarmac. They would concede to the hijackers' demands. The 3 men were put on board, accompanied by German officials. The powerful engines of the Boeing 727 spooled up once more, their familiar whine now a sound of impending release. The plane taxied back onto the runway, and with a final, powerful thrust, it lifted off into the night sky, leaving Zagreb and the Yugoslavian authorities behind. After landing at Tripoli International Airport, the ordeal for the passengers and crew of Lufthansa Flight 615 finally came to a quiet end. The cabin door was opened, and the stale, recycled air was replaced by the cool night air of the Mediterranean coast. They disembarked to a warm welcome, disappearing into the city, their mission a success. A new phase of the wait began, this time tinged with a fragile sense of hope. They were still on board, flying to an unknown fate in a new destination designated by the hijackers, Tripoli, Libya. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted once more. The immediate, acute tension of the deadline had passed, replaced by a weary uncertainty. They were escorted away by Libyan officials, their long day of captivity over. The hijackers were notified through the cockpit radio that their demands had been met. The government of Israel vehemently condemned West Germany's decision, calling it a capitulation to terror that would only embolden future attackers. Within West Germany itself, public opinion was divided. There was immense relief that the hostages had been returned safely, that another Munich had been averted. But there was also a deep sense of unease, a feeling that a dangerous precedent had been set. The story of Flight 615 was over, but its complex legacy, and the debate over the price of saving lives, was just beginning. The plane took off, climbing into the evening sky, its flight path set for Zagreb. Its journey was the physical manifestation of the German government's decision, a quiet flight, carrying a cargo of capitulation in order to secure the promise of life. The thought of a second, similar tragedy unfolding on their watch, so soon after the first, was simply untenable. The passengers and crew wait. They are in a state of suspension, a pause in their own lives, entirely dependent on decisions being made hundreds of miles away, while they waited. A quiet and urgent chain of communication had begun to ripple outwards from the Zagreb control tower, the news of the hijacking, the identity of the perpetrators, and their stark demands traveled swiftly through official channels. Flight 615 was refueled. The ground crew at Zagreb, who had kept their distance for hours, now moved in to perform their duties under the watchful eyes of the captors. The news is delivered to Chancellor Willy Brandt and his cabinet, including the Minister of the Interior, Hans-Dietrich Genscher. For these men, the situation is not just a hostage crisis, it is a direct and painful echo of a trauma that was still fresh. The three prisoners were escorted from the small jet and across the tarmac to the waiting Lufthansa plane. They boarded the 727. For the hijackers, it was a moment of triumph. Their comrades were free. On one hand, the long-held principle of not negotiating with terrorists, of not rewarding acts of violence with political concessions. To give in would be to encourage future acts of this kind. On the other hand, the immediate and undeniable reality of the 17 people on board the aircraft, 12 passengers and 5 crew members, whose lives hung precariously in the balance. From Yugoslavian air traffic control to the West German embassy in Belgrade, and from there, directly to the seat of power in Bonn. Imagine the scene in the Chancellery in Bonn. It is not one of panic, but of grave, focused seriousness. Just 8 weeks earlier, the Munich massacre had concluded with a bloody and failed rescue attempt at the Fürstenfeldbruck air base. And so, the German cabinet was faced with a stark and unenviable choice. The deliberations, while intense, were remarkably swift. The decision was made. The order was given. Now, a new set of procedures was put into motion, a quiet and efficient piece of state logistics. In their separate prison cells, the three men were informed of the situation. There, a small charter jet waited. It was an unremarkable aircraft, chosen for its speed and availability. Back on the tarmac in Zagreb, as dusk began to fall, the passengers inside the 727 saw the small jet land and taxi to a spot near their aircraft. Transfer was arranged. With their primary objective achieved, the hijackers made their final preparations for departure. Then, the silence of the long wait was broken. The ordeal was not quite over for the passengers and crew. The flight to Tripoli was uneventful. The hijackers, having achieved their goal, were less tense. One by one, they descended the stairs onto Libyan soil. They were no longer hostages. They were survivors. The hijackers and the three newly freed men, meanwhile, were greeted not as criminals, but as heroes. In the days that followed, the world reacted. Segment for a Divergent Paths narrator. An event like the hijacking of a passenger jet is a tear in the fabric of ordinary life. For a brief, intense period, the lives of disparate people, passengers, crew, hijackers, politicians, and prisoners are knotted together in a single, complex story. But once the immediate crisis is over, the knot is loosened, and the individual threads travel onwards, their paths forever altered by the encounter. Let us first consider the path of those who simply wanted to go home, the passengers and crew of Flight 615 were flown out of Tripoli back to West Germany. The three released prisoners, Adnan al-Ghashi, Jamal al-Ghashi, and Mohammed Safadi, received a hero's welcome in Libya. The world of espionage is a world of shadows and whispers, and the exact details are often debated by historians. But the consequences were real. His path was not one of returning to normalcy, but of perpetual watchfulness, a constant state of looking over his shoulder. A life that was the very antithesis of the peace the passengers sought. The story of Mohammed Safadi, and later that of Adnan al-Ghashi, would eventually come to a close, their mission accomplished. They melted back into the anonymity from which they came. Two sets of lives, briefly and violently intersected in the cabin of a Boeing 727, veered back onto their separate, and profoundly different, trajectories. One path leading back towards the quiet comfort of the everyday. The other leading deeper into a world of conflict and consequence, the very air they once shared. On the plane was now filled with vastly different futures. They stepped onto the world stage for a single, dramatic day, and then they vanished. Their ultimate fates, their names, their stories remain a footnote, a matter of historical speculation. Their lives, which had been defined by political violence, would also end through violence. Their paths concluding in different countries, years apart. They had been freed, and for a moment, they were symbols of a victory. But their freedom did not mean a return to a quiet life. Their identities were known, and their actions in Munich had set in motion forces that would not be deterred by a single hostage exchange. Their arrival at Frankfurt Airport was quiet and subdued, a stark contrast to the drama they had endured. There were no grand speeches, only the profound relief of family members waiting behind a barrier. There were tears, of course, and tight, desperate embraces that spoke more than words ever could. For these individuals, the journey ahead was one of returning to normalcy. The businessman from our earlier imagining would return to his office, the stack of papers from his briefcase seeming trivial and unimportant for a time. It would become a part of who they were. But a part they would learn to live with, like an old scar, a reminder of a past danger. But no longer an open wound. The rhythm of their lives, so violently interrupted, would gently, gradually, re-establish itself. The goal for all of them was to reclaim the mundane, to find comfort again in the predictable and the boring, but soon, the familiar cadence of his work would take over. The memory of the ordeal slowly encased in the shell of routine. The simple, profound act of unlocking his own front door, of sleeping in his own bed, would carry a new weight and new meaning. The young backpacker would have a story to tell, a story so extraordinary it might seem unreal even to them. Now, let us consider the other path. The path of those for whom this event was not an interruption, but a continuation. In the months and years that followed, the pledge of vengeance made by the Israeli government after Munich began to manifest in a covert, global hunt. One, Jamal al-Ghashi, is believed to have survived for much longer, living a life of caution and concealment, a life in the shadows. And what of the hijackers themselves? The men who took control of Flight 615. History is strangely silent about them. And so, we see the divergence.